I brought to the table a really cool and thought-provoking opinion piece by CoinDesk's own Daniel Kuhn, where he looks at the question of, is crypto a Ponzi? And comes to the conclusion that you need to define Ponzi in order to make that decision. And what's interesting about this piece is that it doesn't just define Ponzi, it attempts to redefine Ponzi. So I am going to peel back a couple of layers on this one. Last month, Robert McCauley, who is an economist at Boston University, wrote an op-ed, and he called Bitcoin worse than a Madoff-style Ponzi scheme. So his point was that people buy Bitcoin with the expectation of profit, and that eventually you're going to cash out to someone else, probably your greater fool. And he called it, he basically called it worse than your everyday pump and dump penny stock. Yeah, okay, so there's that. On the other side, you have Jake Chervinsky, who is the new head of policy at the Blockchain Association, and he is wary of people who are calling all crypto Ponzi schemes, because as he points out, you're using the term Ponzi to mean an economic game with built-in investing incentives and high risk of implosion. The thing is that when you use the word Ponzi, what you're actually describing is a fraudulent scheme in which a criminal deceives victims to steal their money and leaves them with nothing and runs away with the profits, and it all collapses. And that is not what is happening in most cryptocurrencies. It's certainly not what's happening in Bitcoin. Now, as Daniel Kuhn points out, and he's totally right here, words evolve, terms evolve, language is fluid. And as somebody who has, studied linguistics, I appreciate that. On the other hand, as somebody who's studied linguistics and an editor, I also am very fond of, definitions that are widely agreed upon at any given point in time. And so far, I think that the idea of fraud and intent and there being a fraudster who is trying to trick people out of their money is still a key part of the Ponzi definition. So what Daniel does go on to do, though, is he talks about the idea of using sort of Ponzi adjacent terms like Ponzinomics or Ponzi-esque or Ponzi-ish in order to describe crypto schemes that have the promise of high returns if everybody buys in and if everything works out, but really there is that sort of bag holding potential at the end of the day. As he points out, it's why people ape into various protocols. And to a certain extent, it might even be part of the mindset behind hodling Bitcoin. So I'd love to hear what you guys have to say about this, because are you on the existing definition side, the fluid language we need to redefine Ponzi side of things, and is this bad branding for crypto? Zach, I want you to start with this.
I saw Will's hand go up, so I'm going to defer to him.
Oh, you want to go to Will? No, okay, sure.
Real quick, I love what you said earlier, that from my reading of what you're saying, at least, you said crypto can't be a Ponzi because at the end of the day, you do get something, which is true. You can still get a token, which is pretty nice. The question is that token going to have some value once the cycle kind of goes down 95% and you're stuck holding a bag of coins that will never, ever pump again? And a case for a lot of these NFT bros out there who are getting wrecked left and right. At least they have a picture, I suppose. Oh, yeah. Zach, I'll give it to you, though. That's kind of the only insights I have. It was a really great piece by Daniel, I will say.
Really good piece.
Yeah, the theory of the greater fool is definitely different than Ponzi. Ponzi is like there's a central actor. He's taking money from new investors. He's giving that money to old investors. Ponzi requires a central intermediary. There's no CEO of Bitcoin who is taking the money from Coinbase and giving it to the older investors. It just doesn't work that way. However, there are many, many, many greater fools in the crypto markets, whether that's a VC selling the coins that they bought at a particularly low price, talking those bags up, selling them at a higher price, and then watching that precipitous fall, whether that's someone who is swept up in the heat of the moment, the emotion, the FOMO, the fear of missing out on the latest hot NFT mint that for one moment seems like the hottest thing since sliced bread. And then for every subsequent moment is just an absolute dud of an investment. So there's plenty of greater fools in this market, and it's a particularly transparent, dynamic market in which you can observe all this stuff happening. There's tons of data. There's tons of public information about what's going on in this market. This market is absolutely full of greater fools. Is it a Ponzi scheme? No, definitionally, it's not a Ponzi scheme. Is there scams, fraudsters, slimy people, morally dubious actions occurring around a lot of these tokens? Yes. Is it a Ponzi? No. So the question is, get the terminology right was what I'm thinking.
Yeah. And the problem is when you call everything a Ponzi, you're not actually labeling the actual Ponzi. And there are Ponzi schemes. In fact, as Will points out, there's one project out there called Ponzi, I think it's Ponzi.io. And they're like, we're a Ponzi scheme. Why don't you be one of the early people who doesn't get caught with the bag? Get in now, and then you can sell it. And they're like very upfront. George?
Yeah, and this is something I'm actually openly guilty of. And Christy, as my editor, and as someone who, I use the term open Ponzi's quite often, actually. And I didn't study linguistics. I studied math. Christy's my editor, so she's probably going to laugh at this answer. But I think that you can say words that mean something, but if you put more words around it, you can kind of qualify what you're actually trying to say, which is my really long-winded way of saying we can call them Ponzis if we want to, as long as we qualify it. I can talk about this all day, actually, but I think some of the critiques that were brought up in the article that you mentioned, Christy, are hilarious. Robert McCauley, his critique was referencing Bitcoin is a zero coupon perpetual, which is hilarious because zero coupon bonds actually exist. So he's pointing to something in the financial system saying, oh, this is clearly a Ponzi because of the zero coupon thing, but like those things exist. So it's kind of funny. But I also somehow disagreed with Stravinsky's point where he said this is doing massive damage. I don't think so. I think people know that this is a risky environment. The one thing I'd say is that the reason we're using Ponzi-nomics, or I use Open Ponzi, is that calling it long-dated pump and dumps without a clear central figure just doesn't roll off the tongue very well. Anyway, that's my 5 or 10 cents.
Fair enough.
It is catchy. Shout out to Charles Ponzi for having a great name and getting busted for doing some shenanigans.